Wow. That's the first time I've seen that new intros. I like it.
That's quite exciting.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's
Yeah.
awesome. So that's great. Awesome. Vidya is our guest today. She's from InsightGig. Vidya, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So I know a lot about you, but I think folks in the audience, some might know, some might not. So why don't we get started with a little bit about you and then also kind of parlay that into how you got started in market research?
Sure. Well, I guess a little bit about me is going to be highly entwined with how I got into market research as well, because I got placed in Kantar right after campus. So
Mm,
my entire career, so to speak, has been around market research and in quantitative research specifically.
hmm.
Um, I was there for about almost a decade and a half, all with Kantar,
Okay, nice.
and all doing different roles within Kantar. And then around 2014, I left traditional market research, didn't move very far from that. I moved into ResTech
Hmm.
and was part of the team building a customer experience management software called
Nice.
CloudCherry. So
Yep.
that was the second stint that I had after
Nice.
Kantar, after about 14 years, and then yeah, we got acquired by Cisco, and in 2021 is when I got started with InsightGig.
Awesome. That's great. I always like to hear how people got started in research because I feel it's rarely a traditional path, so it's interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I got started with right after campus, and then kind of discovered that hey, this is possibly where I should be.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know, like myself, I got a degree in marketing and then an internship at a research firm, and then I never left. So it was
Yeah,
like, yeah. And
research
then
is so full of stories like this, isn't it?
it is. Yeah. It's funny on a recent survey that we did with MRII, only
Mhm.
17% of market research professionals plan for it out of college. So pretty
Wow.
low if you think about it. Yeah. So
Yes.
yeah. Well, you've been in the research industry for a long time, as I have. And I'm wondering, what do you think are like the biggest changes that you've seen over the past 5 to 10 years?
Um, yeah, very interestingly, I think from the time I started in research till the time I left, and this I'm talking about traditional market research in Kantar,
Hmm.
um, I did see a lot of changes that have happened. And primarily, the big change that I think had a lot of impact on me and continues to do so till today is the fact that when I started off in research, you had, it was fairly straightforward. You had to
Hmm.
conduct interviews with people, you spoke to them, you did primary research, and you collected data. And there was an aspect of secondary research, of course, where you did understand from secondary sources into how a certain market operates. But I think as I went through the trajectory of my career, and around the time that I left Kantar, was when we saw this influx of data sources, right? So data
Hmm.
really stemming from everywhere. And what this does is have a ripple effect, because once the data structure the I guess the data sources become networked and not really linear, and you have complete control over where the data is coming from, then
Right.
you start the ways in which you analyze data, the ways in which you clean the data, the ways in which you assess quality of the data, all of it starts having an impact, right? And you
Hmm.
need to apply different methodologies in order to address all of these very differently from how you used to do when you had complete control over how you went after the data and collected it in the first place. So I think
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
was possibly the biggest change that I saw in my career. And to
Hmm.
me, that single change had so much impact in terms of how the industry has evolved itself, because this simple change really led to the birth of ResTech also.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I possibly would distill this as the biggest thing that had an impact on me, on the change that had an impact on me as
Yeah.
I saw.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think we're both old enough to realize or to remember life before online surveys, right? And
Yes.
it's interesting. Like, I think the adjunct of that obviously spurred, the adoption of more, res tech and that industry, obviously, scaling. But it's interesting that you bring that up in terms of introducing this new way to collect data. I'll also introduce new avenues that you need to use to analyze it, to code it, to make sense of it. So I think that's really, really interesting. Do you think that's sort of that changes that had the biggest impact over the last 5 to 10 years, or do you think there's other things that may have had an equal or bigger impact?
To me, I think this had possibly the biggest impact simply because it brought in changes across the entire chain of reaching insights, right? You had
Mm-hmm.
the minute you, the way in which you collected data changed, then the way in which you checked for data quality changed, how you
Right.
create data structures changed, where you store the data changed, and how you analyzed and visualized the data changed, and how
Mm-hmm.
you kind of put all of these different sources together in order to create a unique story changed. So
Mm-hmm.
I would think that this kind of led to a lot of other changes that happened in the industry itself. Um, and this is not to undermine the other impact that happened, but to me, this kind of forms the source from where all of this evolved.
Got it. No, I think that makes sense. That makes sense. And then what's interesting to me about your career as well, and I don't have this as a question, but I just thought of it as we were talking, is you had a interesting path in terms of like product management and impacting products in certain ways, from CloudSherry to certainly InsightGig.
Yeah.
What do you look for in terms of putting like features into products, or how do you determine, hey, this is a good feature? Do you rely on client feedback? Do you rely on like forward thinking? And the reason I ask that, because it kind of parlays a little bit into what you're mentioning before in terms of new features, new technology, and how do you define that in terms of what customers want?
Sure. I think there is always this little bit of a mix in terms of how you determine product features, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, one of the I think one of the fundamental principles is to kind of let the requirements of the customers lead how you evolve a product, rather than having a wish list of, hey, this is how I want my product to look. Because at the end of the day, you do want what the product does to have tangible value to whoever is using the product. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, we did have a lot of emphasis on how we were collecting feedback from clients. Now, this feedback I felt is not really just coming from asking and answering questions, because I mean, and we all know that, right? From our research backgrounds, you know that the way in which you ask questions
Mm-hmm.
and what you ask questions around has a huge influence on the kind of answers. Because leading questions, of course, will tell you the answer you want to hear, and
Yep.
there are some questions where respondents or your clients don't really know how to answer the question, so they would give you an answer but may not be the right thing.
Right.
So this is really where the confluence of understanding how people behave or interact with a particular software or our product specifically,
Mm-hmm.
as well as what they are asking for and what they do outside of the product, really influenced how we develop the product. Because a lot of times what they do outside the product told you, hey, this my product is not doing this, and this is a gap which people may not even have realized because they're
Yep.
used to doing it outside of the product. But then you kind of realize that that's the gap that you need to be filling in. So product
Mm-hmm.
features were developed, using this approach by creating a confluence of behavior, and of course what people articulated as things that they wanted out of the product or what they were unable to do with the product. So this is
Right.
really how the roadmap was built for us.
That makes sense, and I think it's tough to determine a little bit too of what I think clients want in a res tech product, especially if it's new in the marketplace, right? You have to almost get it out there, let the market kind of decide what features and
Yes.
functionality you want, and then go that route. So one thing I do want to ask you about, and over the last 5 to 6 months, I think everybody's been inundated with ChatGPT, OpenAI. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I like to post about it on LinkedIn and play around with it. So I'm certainly not putting anybody down, because I think it's amazing technology. But I wanted to get your thoughts on it as someone that's been in the res tech space, and then also how you see it disrupting the industry.
So I'm staying cautious and optimistic, right? The reason,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's obviously a researcher tendency also, but the reason is I do think, at least in terms of how we are trying to use generative AI in our organization itself, uh,
Mm-hmm.
um, we are experimenting with a lot, but I do believe that it has the potential to become an amplifier,
Mm-hmm.
Whether it'll be a replacer is where I'm very circumspect. For example,
Mm.
you do have there are certain products that are in the market now which can actually tell you what a consumer of your certain profile would possibly be saying to a question that you're asking, to a research that you're
Sure.
asking. And
Yeah.
that kind of takes you into the realm of, hey, will primary research exist tomorrow? Will we need to actually go to consumers and ask questions?
Mm.
Now, those are avenues which I'm very circumspect about, right?
Hmm.
Because as we know, when you go talk to consumers, the nuances that you get which take you to insights are far different from generalized stereotypes. So those are places which I'm more cautious about, where AI can play a role, and those are my red flags in terms of, hey,
Hmm.
these we need to test out and understand how AI can play a role. But simple things like, hey, help me create a better questionnaire,
Yep.
help me manage my data quality better. Is there a way in which I can in real time assess the quality of the data that I am collecting, and which
Hmm.
tells me that, hey, this data doesn't look right, and maybe you need to redo the fieldwork, or maybe the questions need to be asked in a different way. So
Hmm.
those are aspects on the chain of research where I feel AI can have a strong impact. And at least the early studies that we are kind of doing, we do seem to be getting positive results on those aspects of it.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point. And, the way that I've positioned it and kind of what you said too is use it as the best research assistant you've ever had, right? I
Yeah,
mean, in terms of, hey, if you want feedback on a questionnaire or data quality or help coding open ends, whatever it might be, like I would utilize it for those things as well. But, to your point around, um, what you mentioned earlier around certain aspects of coming up with new ideas and using it now, I think it's still early, and I think you still need a human touch in a lot of these situations. So I would definitely agree with you there. Super interesting technology and ways to integrate it in.
yeah.
Yeah.
And especially, I think when we come to analytics and how it's going to possibly help us analyze open-ended far better than what we could do so far, it has great potential. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
seeing what we can do there.
Yeah, I am as well. I am as well. Do you think so? I know we want to talk about the skill gap in the market research industry. Does this create more of a skill gap? Like, what I mean by that is the way that I see it is I don't think that AI will replace most jobs. I think it will replace people that don't adopt AI eventually and in some
Yeah.
capacity. So does this further that skill gap? And then maybe talk about what the skill gap is in the market research industry.
Sure. So I think there are some jobs that AI is going to replace, for sure. And I think
Hmm.
these would be, like you rightly said, people who have roles that haven't yet realized how to use AI to make themselves more efficient. So I think those roles will definitely be under risk. But is it going to actually replace uh, a lot of the research roles? I think not, because I think
Hmm.
AI will become, at the end of the day, an amplifier, maybe change the way in which we do research and reach insights, make it more efficient, make it faster. But I don't think it's going to replace the stages of the research as well as
Hmm.
the humans who are needed to in order to be able to deliver that.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, in terms of skill gap, if we don't figure out how to use AI well enough, then that's going to start creating a bigger gap than what exists today.
Yeah.
um, but going back to skill gap in itself, I think
Hmm.
skill gap may not necessarily be the right word
Okay.
to in terms of what I'm trying to say. But
Yeah.
I'll use it for what it is, since I don't have a better
Okay.
uh, better term right now.
Sure.
But uh, in terms of the skill gap itself, I'm going back to the big change that I was talking about in research, right? So
Hmm.
suddenly you have all these little pockets of information that exist, and there are different ways in which one needs to get them. One needs to collect them, one needs to analyze them, one needs to get results from them. And you
Hmm.
also have this now additional skill of being able to put all this together in order to reach
Hmm.
the insight. And the way
Hmm.
in which you need to do it is only becoming faster every day, because the speed at which insights are required for decision making has increased a lot.
Yeah.
Now,
100. Yeah.
this creates a unique problem for agencies as well as organizations, right? Organizations which use research as well as agencies which deliver research, is because the specialized skills that you need in order to be able to identify and analyze different aspects of data has
Hmm.
become a lot, has become far more than what it was in the past.
Hmm.
Now it becomes impossible for someone to actually bring in all of these skills required, these specialized skills required within a single organization, because you are adding to your overheads, and you may not need each of those skills for every project that you are doing or for every
Hmm.
insight that you are trying to reach. So I think the problem is not that there is a massive skill gap, but how well can you bring the skill gap together for a required use case? I think that is really where the gap exists. There is no elegant way of really bringing this together, because you can't have all these people in an organization and you can't keep building the organizational overhead. And where do
Right.
you go from them? So I think that is the skill gap that we really felt when we saw this change happening in the industry.
Got it. No, I think that makes sense. So it's not so much. I mean, it is a skills gap in that I'm an organization and I need to run a particular kind of study, but I don't have anybody on my team that knows enough about that particular study to run it. But I only need to do it, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I need to find someone that can go do it, like whatever it might be, ethnographies, moderation, report writing, whatever it might be for a
Yeah, it
particular
might be to it
methodology.
might be to build a small scale model on your data. It might be which you might just want to run a couple of times a year. It might be how do I effectively bring in social media data in order to analyze it with the brand track that I am running. So it could be
Hmm.
any of these unique combinations that exist today, which possibly didn't exist 10 years ago.
Right. No, that makes complete sense. And then because you have that piece, and then you also have more of like the gig economy coming together too, right?
Right.
So, and obviously, Insight Gig. Is that essentially what the product is, right?
Yeah, so we thought that creating a platform that helps you make these connections and
Hmm.
helps you create on demand task force, which makes sure that you are able to bring in the best skills that you need at that point in time to for a particular use case. You can do
Hmm.
that easily, you can do that without adding to your overheads, and you can do it on demand. So we thought this is possibly an elegant solution to the problem that we are facing, and which is really the premise on which InsightGig is built.
Got it. Got it. So you have both consultants, and then you have both people looking for consultants, and you kind of marry them
Correct.
up. What are some of the best ways that you do that? Is it based on skill? Is it based on rankings? How does that process work?
So there are a couple of things that we do. One is, of course, purely skill based in terms of whether what are your skills. Are you a neuro linguistic programmer? Do you have
Hmm.
NLP skills? Do you have quantitative skills? So all of these skills can come together as different individuals coming together for a specific use case, depending on what the use case needs. So one is skills. The second one, of course, that we use is actually qualitative nuances of how people want to work, because in the gig
Hmm.
economy, that starts to matter a lot.
Yeah.
And you see that when you form a task force, then you need different skill sets from the different people who are working with you. There are some people who might be fine within the task force as an independent contributor. There
Yeah.
might be some people who need to be a team player, who can take instructions from maybe someone in the business and execute it. There may be people who need to have operational skills. So those are some of the characteristics and nuances that we bring in, which we try to build into how we match people in forming a team which can run a project.
Got it. Got it. No, I think that's interesting. You bring up an interesting point too with how people want to work, right? Some people might want to work during the day, some at night, some like, hey, I'm going to work 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening. Does that work? And probably for some teams it doesn't. So I think matching that with how someone prefers to work is really smart too.
Yeah, and I think and this starts becoming very relevant, especially when you have people getting seconded into existing teams in order to just bring a specific skill set into that team for the time being. Then they need to
Hmm.
fit in within the how the team is already working, rather than trying to say I'll do work my own way. So that matching starts becoming important, because they may be great as an individual contributor, but if they
Hmm.
cannot align themselves with the way a team is working, then
Hmm.
that particular task force is not going to be successful.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. And do you see companies coming on there and finding someone for like 6 months, or is it for a particular project? What's the typical use case?
Oh, we
Both.
actually have three use cases that we've kind of stumbled upon. The
Hmm.
first one, of course, is projects, which is really what the platform was built and intended for. Then, of
Yeah.
course, we did find that people wanted to augment the skill sets within their team for a period of time. So that could be 3, 6 months, even up to a year. And then we do have people coming in and looking for full-time employment as well on the platform.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I'm gonna have to check this out even more because I'm interested. We have some skill gaps that I think we need to fill here. So
Of course, we'd be happy to help you.
yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. So if people want to know more, where can they go and how can they find out more about you?
Of course, they can. I mean, we have our website, which is simply InsightsGig.com, and we're the first, hopefully, the first Google prompt that pops up.
Hmm.
We, of course, have our InsightGig LinkedIn page and my personal LinkedIn page, which is Vidya Venugopalan. And finally, anybody who wants to reach out to us can write to me at vidya@insightgig.com.
Awesome. That's great. Well, Vidya, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciated it. And it was nice to get your perspective on everything from market research to ResTech to ChatGPT. We covered a lot of ground, so I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Dan. Pleasure talking to you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye bye.
We'll see you soon. All right. Bye-bye.